Was summoned on an emergency dive on April 12, 2013. At the time, I typically did forensic and rescue dives, but this was something else altogether. Typically, when I am summoned, time is a real and quantifiable element. For instance, a person may be in danger of death, or there is an object that must be retrieved within a certain time frame. In this case, the mission was not defined. My initial impression was that this was some kind of catastrophic thing. I got called up in the dead of night with no notice, and there was mention of a quantifiable geological phenomenon. I wasn't informed, and every individual who was involved just stonewalled me with a series of I don't knows. I knew basically anyone who worked at my level throughout the state, but these individuals were simply gray-faced anonymous nobodies. They took me all the way to Greenbrier Valley, West Virginia. Imagine this middle-of-nowhere dirt road, blanketed by government-issued vehicles. Off the top of my head. Aged guy near tears with anger at a young woman. He just kept waving his papers in her face, and she just nodded and smiled. At some point, people began to ask me questions. What's the ETA for your prep? Did you bring your own equipment? Are you signed in? Where is the sign-in? There were others that I'd worked with on site. There was Garrett, who'd just turned 44, and Nora. I'd worked with Nora on a couple of rescue dives, but nothing on this magnitude. There were a few familiar faces in the crowd that I sort of knew, but Garrett and Nora stood out. They were already getting dressed. They were getting ready for a cold dive and inspecting equipment. I had some paper stuffed in my hands. When I signed, I could see a ring of people forming around one of the USAC representatives and an older woman in a professional pantsuit. You got 12 hours, said the woman in the pantsuit. Not a second longer. This is private property. We can stall, said the representative. We can drag you through the courts. Go ahead. I'm sure the judge is waiting with bated breath to hear you justify your sudden interest in our property. We don't have to justify, you, vulture, in 12 hours, you will be trespassers. We will summon private security and you will be escorted off the property. The lady in the pantsuit stepped forward, jabbing the USS representative with a pile of paper. Jabbing the USS representative with a pile of paper, our congressman is anxious to have you defunded, you. As the discussion cooled off, the representative was seething in the dirt. She was furious and nobody ventured near her. After a brief second, she stormed off. Fucking hatchet men, someone in the crowd muttered as the woman in the pantsuit stormed off, goddamn war criminals. Garrett motioned me over and I sat down on a log beside him. I began to dress down. Someone needs to talk to me, I said. Someone tell me what's happening. Earthquake, said Nora. Not large, but yeah, what does the have to do with an earthquake? It's the lake, Garrett said. You'll see. Still getting into my equipment, we were shoved forward. They grabbed me by the arm and pushed me on, overwhelming me with questions, along the way. When we finally emerged from a forest glade, what was meant to be a small lake lay open before us, except it was no longer a lake. The water had been drained, and all that remained was an bed of mud and back. Thousands of seagulls feeding on dead fish in a frenzy of screeching. Hazmat-clad men were attempting to scare them away. But they only managed to slip and slide around in the muck. In the center of the empty lake there was a pit approximately 6 by 4 feet. It was the only area that yet still held water. There were tables positioned around it with security tape and red markers. There were a dozen individuals scattered around, a dozen laptops computing and double-checking measurements. An anonymous female appeared on each side of us, pushing us ahead. I could feel the sun's heat on the horizon roughly an hour before dawn. We're making a blind dive, she said. We want you to be in continuous contact with us with whatever you see. You'll be going in within the hour. We're not doing that, said Garrett. There's no emergency here. There's no suddenly. Garrett tumbled into the mud. The woman pushed him. "You're doing this," she growled. "You're doing this, we ain't doing, till we receive you, see that?" She cut Garrett off, nodding at the fleet of cars. "That, right there is a sworn oath that I'll burn your goddamn life to the ground, you cocky. Now you do this, or you'll never touch a glass of water again." Nora assisted Garrett to his feet and we scrambled down into the hole. I couldn't hear anything above the feast riot seagulls. I was relieved by the rubber mask preventing me from smelling dead fish. Two guys did their best to prepare the essentials, but we had nothing. There was literally no dive plan. No knowledge of the temperature, the stability, the currents, anything. These individuals had absolutely no clue. The only thing they were able to respond was the extent of what we were diving into. The little earthquake had uncovered an expansive cave system which the lake water had flowed into, about 350 feet wide and 700 feet deep, all below ground. I attempted to get my mind around it. We checked out our co-linked masks and agreed on individual tracking lines. We'd be diving for 20 minutes, then reserve 25 for depressurizing and resurfacing. We would have air tanks in rotation, and constant communications with the guys at the control. If we saw even a hint of trouble, we'd bail, no exceptions. We weren't going in blind for that much longer. We had a consensus on resurfacing if there was a comms malfunction. Although we all knew hand any level, we were still signals by heart. This couldn't go wrong on. Since setting up when we were provided with hand chisels and self-sealing bags. "We want samples of everything," they informed us, everything. Let's try to put this in perspective. At this time, we hardly knew anything. An earthquake had uncovered a cave system on some sort of company land. The depth and size of this was unimaginable. Within 12 hours, we would be ejected from the site, perhaps so they could conduct their own tests. This cave complex had been entirely cut off, perhaps for tens of thousands of years, perhaps hundreds. Someone even continued using the term Karoo Ice Age. But that seemed unlikely. This place would either be a one-off resource or a total waste of time. We were at least 1 to 2 hours in on the countdown when we dipped our toes in the water for the first time. It was colder than expected. Sitting on the edge, with my feet hanging in the slushy water, one of the infield techs double-checked my air tanks. "Geez, isn't it?" He grinned. "I'm envying you. How is it you get to go in?" He laughed. "A real space unseen by any human eyes ever." "That's not always a good idea," nodded Nora. "And there's a lot of that down on the ocean floor." We made that initial plunge. I could barely look around due to the mud and the reeds, so we simply went straight down. The water grew colder with each foot. And tiny specks of dust flying around me made it seem like riding through a rainstorm. When we moved further down, this feeling of unease crept into my chest. I'd never has been so unprepared for a dive, and this was more than anything I'd ever done. There's a reason why you're not supposed to get into underwater caves. This was, in more than one sense, uncharted waters. We descended roughly 25 feet, where we finally reached rock bottom. The cave wall was coarse and jagged with some sort of thin crystal lining. Salt, I guessed. Nora received a sample as anonymous voices hummed in our ears. I could hardly hear half of it. "Go deeper." There came a voice through, "There is nothing up there." We charted 3 different tunnels leading even deeper. The first one we examined turned out to be so narrow my equipment might snag on the walls. We backed out and attempted another tunnel until we came to one large enough for us to move through comfortably. Still, it was crawling more than swimming. "Turtle 1, we're seismic." A voice broke through. "Respond, please. Stand by equalizing." I could sense the mechanism from the camera on my shoulder fretting. Garrett came through on the local channel. "No way the signal sticks," he sighed. "Quartz and granite. This is useless." Resurface in 10, I told her. Look for samples in the cracks. The tunnel took us to a little cave. The water was not as murky, but the area was only 15 by 20 feet and at most 6 feet high. It was sufficient for us to regroup, inspect our tethers, and take some samples. Nora discovered some sort of clear goo along a crack in the wall, as Garrett attempted to chisel away a chunk of the granite. I spotted something glinting, but it was only the flash of my camera reflecting off a bit of quartz. I picked it up, though I couldn't let myself leave without something. When our time was up, we returned upstairs for air. We were slow and methodical, but we were getting results. There was no way we'd reach the bottom in 12 hours, but we figured we could get something interesting given enough dives. When we came back up, there was at least 50 people standing in a circle to look at us. Men in hazmat suits brought coolers for us to put the samples in, and 2 technicians were repairing a hookah air hose system. We took a brief break to wait for them to complete it, switch out our air tanks, and discuss our second dive. This time, we could dive deeper. The air hoses could go up to 60 feet, but they were already in the process of an extension. Still, Garrett demanded to refill our air tanks, too, just in case. While we connected the air hoses, the stiff chemical air in our tanks was traded off with this smelly forest wind, reeking of dead fish and mud. There was a bit of a whiff of diesel, too, coming from one of the on-site generators. When we dove back into the murky waters, we drove headfirst towards the tunnels. This time, we were diving deeper, deeper than the reeds, deeper than the mud. We charted 3 more tunnels, deeper and deeper down. We moved slowly. Our new air hoses as tethers, but soon enough we were at the limit. Nora called it out, surface control, we need a longer line. No answer. We waited for a second, but